Magandang araw viewers and welcome to our video blog. Today we're diving into something super important but often overlooked, the four major constitution of the Philippines. Yes, you heard it right. From the historic Malolos Constitution of 1899 to the 1935 Constitution, the controversial 1973, and of course, our current 1987 Constitution. We're breaking them down in a fun, simple, and engaging way. We'll explore what makes each constitution unique, how they shape our government, and how they mirror the events of their time. We'll also compare their strengths and weaknesses, and finally answer the big question, does the 1987 Constitution need an update? Stick around until the end, because we'll be giving our own recommendations on how we can improve our Constitution moving forward. Let's begin this exciting journey through Philippine history and democracy. So before we proceed to the discussion, let me give you a short background of the four constitutions. Let us start with the Malolos Constitution 1899. This was the first democratic constitution in Asia, crafted by Filipino revolutionaries. It established the first Philippine Republic under President Emilio Aguinaldo. It emphasized the civil liberties, separation of church and state, and a parliamentary system. Second, 1935 Constitution. Created under U.S. supervision. The 1935 Constitution established the Commonwealth government. It introduced a presidential system, separation of powers, and a bicameral legislators, and a Bill of Rights similar to the U.S. model. Third, 1973 Constitution. Drafted during the Marcos era, this constitution shifted the system to a parliamentary form. However, due to the martial law, power was concentrated in the hands of the president. It changed the structure of the legislative and executive branches significantly. And lastly, the 1987 Constitution. After the EDSA People Power Revolution, the 1987 Constitution restored democracy, strengthened human rights protections, and revived the presidential bicameral government system. It emphasized checks and balances and limited executive power.
Malolos Constitution 1899 is considered a historic milestone not only for the Philippines but also for Asia because it was the first constitution in Asia created and written by Asians. This showed that Filipinos were capable of governing themselves and were no longer dependent on colonial powers for political ideas and leadership. It established a parliamentary system of government in which the legislature held great power. The president served merely as the head of state, while decisions were mostly made by the elected president or representatives. This system was designed to avoid abuse of power by a single leader. One of its most important features was the guarantee of religious freedom and basic civil rights. This was very significant because during Spanish rule, Catholicism was the dominant religion and other beliefs were not freely practiced. The Malolos Constitution promoted equality and justice by allowing people to practice any religion and by recognizing their natural rights as citizens. In 1935 Constitution was patterned after the United States prudential system, which introduced the idea of three separate branches of government, which is the executive, legislative, and judicial. This system was meant to ensure checks and balance so that no branch would become too powerful. An important milestone under this constitution was the inclusion of women's suffrage, which was approved through plebiscite in 1937. For the first time, Filipino women were given the right to vote, marking a major step toward gender equality in the country. The Constitution also created the National Economic Council, which was responsible for planning the nation's economic development. This helped guide the government in making long-term decisions related to national growth, employment, and industrial progress.
Malulu's Constitution, 1899, Unique Provisions. First constitution in Asia created by Asians. It was the earliest written constitution made by Asians for an Asian nation, showing Filipino ability to build their own government. Parliamentary system with a strong legislature. The legislature assembly of representatives had more power than the president. The president mainly handled executive tasks but was accountable to the assembly. Guarantee of religious freedom and civil rights. It protected basic rights such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, equality before the law, and protection against abuses. 1935 Constitution, Unique Provisions, U.S. Model Presidential System. It followed the American style of government with the president, vice president in the bicameral Congress or Senate and the House. The president had strong executive powers. Provided for women's suffrage. 1937 amendment. Women were allowed to vote after the national plebiscite where the majority of women approved their right to vote. Created the National Economic Council. This council advised the president on economic plans and national development, helping guide the country's economic direction.
The Malolos in 1973 constitutions both used parliamentary systems. Both constitutions adopted a parliamentary form of government, where the executive and legislative branches are closely connected. Malolos Constitution, 1899. It set up a true parliamentary system where the Assembly of Representatives had strong power, and the President acted mainly as the head of the executive but remained accountable to the legislature. This showed early Filipino leaders' desire for a government based on cooperation and representation. 1973 Constitution. Although it claimed to establish a parliamentary system with a prime minister and batasang pambansa, in reality, it did not function as intended because of martial law. The President, Ferdinand Marcos, continued to hold both executive and legislative powers. So it was a parliamentary system in theory but not in actual practice. The 1935 and 1987 constitutions used a presidential system. These constitutions followed a presidential form of government, where power is clearly divided among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. 1935 Constitution. Modeled after the U.S., it granted strong executive powers to the President, supported by a Vice President and bicameral Congress. It was meant to prepare the Philippines for eventual independence after the American period. 1987 Constitution, also presidential but with much stronger checks and balance to prevent abuses. The President has clear limits, Congress has oversight powers, and the judiciary is strengthened to protect citizens' rights.
The 1987 Constitution is the most focused on human rights, democracy, and accountability. This Constitution was drafted after the 1986 People Power Revolution, which ended years of a martial law. Because of past abuses, the drafter made sure to include a very detailed Bill of Rights, limits on martial law and executive power. Independent bodies like COMELEC, COE, CSC, and the CHR. The party list system to represent marginalized groups, rules promoting to transparency and anti-corruption. Its goals was to rebuild trust in government and protect citizens from future dictatorship.
The 1973 Constitution centralized power to the President. Even though it introduced a parliamentary structure, the actual political environment of martial law meant the president held almost all power. The Batasang Pamansa had limited independence. Emergency powers allowed control over government, media, and military. Checks and balances were weakened or ignored. Thus, the Constitution reflected an authoritarian political climate despite its formal structure. Overall, each constitution reflects the political climate of its time.
Comparison and contrast. The Malolos in 1973 constitutions both used parliamentary systems, while the 1935 and 1987 constitutions used a presidential system. The 1987 constitution is the most focused on human rights, democracy, and accountability because it was created right after martial law abuses. The 1935 Constitution emphasizes developing government institutions under U.S. guidance, while the 1973 Constitution centralized power to the President despite claiming to be parliamentary. Overall, each constitution reflects the political climate of its time: revolution, colonial transition, authoritarianism, and democratic restoration.
Is there a need to revise the 1987 Constitution? Yes, there are reasons people argue for revisions. Outdated economic restrictions, anti-political dynasty provisions not implemented, need for stronger local autonomy, and slow government processes due to too many checks and balances. But others say reforms must be careful because we might lose democratic safeguards, charter change might be abused by politicians, and human rights protections must remain strong. So the answer? Yes, revision may be needed, but with strict limitation to protect democracy.
Recommendations to improve the Constitution. Strengthen anti-dynasty laws. Pass an enabling law so that political power won't be concentrated in a few families. Update economic provisions. Allow more foreign investment opportunities while still protecting Filipino labor. Digital governance and cybersecurity rights. Add provisions about data privacy, cybercrime, and AI regulation.
Reforming the justice system is a crucial step towards ensuring that justice is served efficiently and effectively. A faster trial process can help reduce the backlog of cases and elevate the suffering of victims and their families. Strengthening protection for witnesses and victims is also vital to encourage them to come forward and testify without fear or intimidation or retaliation. In the Philippines, there have been efforts to improve the justice system, such as the implementation of the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act and Witness Protection Program. However, more needs to be done and address the systematic issues and ensure that the rights of all individuals are protected. Some potential solutions could include 1. Increasing the funding for the justice system to improve infrastructure and resources. 2. Implementing alternative dispute resolution mechanisms such as mediation and attribution. 3. Providing training and support for judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officials. 4. Strengthening laws and policies to protect witnesses and victims. 5. Improving access to justice for marginalized and vulnerable groups. LGUs needs more autonomy to address their unique needs. More resources and flexibility can help them implement projects that directly benefit their communities. Some ways to improve autonomy include increasing internal revenue allotment IRA and allowing LGUs to manage funds effectively. Simplify bureaucratic process for project approvals. Building local government capacity for better planning and governance. Defend the goals and perform. Pero let's look at both options. Parliamentary system. Shifting parliamentary system, ensuring checks and balances remain strong and crucial. This can achieve thought through a strong and independent judiciary, robust opposition voice and parliament, free and independent media, active civil society and watchdog organization, transparency and accountability mechanism.
And that wraps up our journey through the four major Philippine constitutions, from the revolutionary Malolos Constitution to the Commonwealth era, to the challenges of martial law, and finally to our democracy today. Each constitution shows who we were, who we are, and who we aim to become as a nation. Remember, a constitution isn't just a document. It's a promise to protect our rights, strengthen our government, and guide the country toward a better future.